Middle school teachers, what is the cringiest thing you've seen a student do? Story 1 had an 8th grade girl pretend to pass out because she was upset. She got written up for screaming that another girl was in the middle of a science lesson, then got upset when that other girl didn't also get in trouble for looking at her wrong. In the dean's office she was so upset that she pretended to faint complete with back of the palm to the forehead and dramatic exhale, and then laid on the floor until we were forced to call an ambulance. Before the ambulance came, Mom walked in. She worked right across the street and said, "Damn it, Jennifer, we're not doing this again." So evidently this was a regular happening around their house. At this point, the girl squinted her eyes open but refused to actually get up. When the squad got there, they checked her vitals and basically knew she was fine. They had to take her because we can't take chances with this stuff in schools. We all just kind of looked at each other and shrugged, so, yeah, that was cringy. Story 2 There was always this kid that would go up to guys, shake their hands and deeply sniff their necks. One day a teacher asked why he did this to guys, and all he said was if I did it to girls it would be weird. Story 3 I once confiscated what I first thought was a note being passed in class, but turned out to be a gay fan fic one of my students wrote, pairing 2 of her classmates. Story 4 Kid wore clothes to school with the price tag sticking out. When asked why, I was informed that this was to let everyone know he was wearing new clothes. Story 5 One student wanted to ask me if I had a doppelganger. What he actually said was, "Do you have a..." I also had a girl ask me what food stamps were, which isn't surprising because the district is very affluent, I explained, but she still seemed confused, so she asked what it means to blow a trucker for food stamps. Evidently she was reading a book meant for a more mature audience, and her worldly knowledge hadn't caught up to her reading level yet. Story 6 My mom is a middle school English teacher. Once, a student snuck a bar of soap into her class, ate it, and proceeded to run out of the classroom and start vomiting. Apparently, he did it to impress his friends. Story 7 I had a student who would constantly butt into people's conversations, and when they asked him to mind his own business, he'd stand up and proclaim, "Nobody likes me. Everyone thinks I'm so annoying, haha," and he'd laugh while everyone awkwardly stared at him. Another kid literally told me one time that he would just act annoying so that he could impress a certain group of boys. They were not impressed. Story 8 There was the student who had his hands in his pants, moving his hand up and down almost to a rhythm. That was cringy. I just stared at him in the eye till he noticed that I knew, and then he stopped. Edit store became stared. Story 9 I work for a private school. This middle schooler recently started dating another one. The girl decided to come to school in a black leather miniskirt and black leather tank top combo. At recess, which I watched because it's a small school, she was dancing all around in front of her boyfriend and hanging of the fence a la stripper. It was hilarious and so cringy. Story 10 I teach history and let my students do a PowerPoint presentation on the history on anything. Some kid did the history of furries. He came to class wearing his fursuit. I teach high school now, edit, and to the people saying he couldn't afford a fursuit, I didn't say it was a good suit. It was made by cheap local fabric and sewed together by all the sewing skills he learned in home eco. It was a patchwork mess. Story 11 I caught the student on Google search attempting to look me up. He spelled my name wrong. My name is very common, so I wasn't worried. I sent him home since it was an after-school homework club, then went through the rest of the history, which included naked women, Megan Fox nudes, and Megan Fox panties. One of the other students in the class kind of picked up on what was happening, and mentioned that he has also been kicked out of the public library for similar reasons. Story 12 Oh I just thought about another. They were talking about dank memes which were about band class BTW. I was told, "Mrs. Confuzzledeb, don't look up dank memes, okay?" I told them that I had been on the internet since before they were born. Edit I did not expect this post to be so popular. It's good to know that this thing that happened in my classroom has amused so many people. Story 13 had a kid who legitimately believed he was a Sith, like from Star Wars. His helicopter mom would come flying down to the school crying religious discrimination if you told him otherwise. He would relax his throat and talk in a deep voice and say it was his real voice, but he disguised his voice to not scare his human brethren. On free dress days, he'd wear an all-denim outfit with high waters and denim vest over a denim shirt. I had him for science, so he'd blurt out things about alchemy from an anime he was into whenever we were working with the periodic table. He also had a girlfriend who lived in Mexico, who was also his cousin. Story 14 Around the 8th grade dance season, they call it prom. There is a whole lot of cringiness roaming the halls. One popular tactic among the boys was explained to me: we ask the girl to prom, and then we run away so she can't say no. Story 15 I was demonstrating convection, which included burning some newspaper. One kid piped up with him, "That smells like," he meant incense. They were too young to get it, but I nearly died trying not to laugh. Story 16 I had a 6th grader lick a book. He definitely tried to keep it on the DL, so he looked around, made sure no one was looking in his direction, and then licked the book. It was a tongue poke, then a full-out lick up the spine of the book, edit a word. Story 17 I once offered a boy a My Little Pony color by number sheet, ran out of Super Mario. The boy's response: "Mister, I'm not gay, I'm a lesbian, I like girls." Story 18 After 10 years of middle school, I should had a novel's worth. However, so many years of middle school decimates your brain, and as someone else said, middle schoolers are generally cringy most of the time. The kid who wrote Mrs. Sharpanet loves cookies on the board when he sincerely meant to write cookies definitely ranks high up there, though we all cringed that day. Edit guys, It didn't take me 10 years to finish middle school, I promise, only 9. Seriously, I meant 10 years of teaching middle school, but I should have clarified because you all don't know me in real life. If you did, you'd know I love cockies and cookies. Story 19. I taught 4th grade last year, and I had a student who was 12 years old, middle school age, held back a few years. She always did very odd things to try to impress her classmates, but they were relatively tame, until there was a line in the bathroom and she took her pants off, squatted over the trash can and peed. 4 or 5 girls came running out of the bathroom and told on her. Story 20. When I was in 6th grade science class, one of my classmates had to do an oral presentation in which she needed to say the word organism frequently. She said every single time. The few students who caught on were melting in their chairs with bright red faces, and the teacher was trying so hard to hold back his laughter that tears were streaming down his face. Story 21. I will relay a short story that my 7th grade bio teacher told us. In that class we dissected a cow eyeball. The year before us, a student pocketed the lens of the eye. Looks like a yellowish hard thing about the size of a peanut. In his next class he stood up and swallowed it in front of everyone. Another teacher told me about a student he had who would come to school in different costumes, ninja, soldier, etc., and stay in character the whole day. I do not remember the details, but there was an incident in which he threw throwing stars during a talent show. Story 22. Just finished my first year of teaching middle school. I had one particular student who did not view me as an authority and refused to work in my class. This was especially concerning because this student was placed in an advanced class, and chose to not learn purely because of who the teacher was. This also meant that the student's classmates were well-behaved, gifted students. One day, while the whole class was completing an assignment, this student was not working. When I addressed the issue, the student threw a fit and started crawling around on the floor, underneath the other students' desks. Now I don't know when you've last been in a middle school classroom, but the floor is absolutely filthy. This student thoroughly embarrassed themselves, as was evident by the looks received from the other students. The whole situation was extremely awkward for everyone, especially when the student realized that they would get no support from the other students. Story 23. Director of Technology here. I don't really have much to do with the kids at the school I work at, but I definitely have a cringy moment. Called down to the middle school from my office to debug a problem for a teacher. The classrooms in this building all have 2 doors. One door opens into the building hallways, the other opens to the outside. My office is across a field from the middle school, so I decide to just cut across the field and enter the side door to the classroom instead of going all the way around the field and entering the classroom from the hallway. Bear in mind that these outside doors are almost never used by anyone except for an occasional fire drill. I open the door and step in to see a room full of students facing away from me and towards their teacher. The student closest to me scrambles to click X on her browser, but not before I see full-on, hardcore, yaoi hentai. Did I mention I work at a Christian private school? She turns bright red and with visibly trembling hands she closes her laptop lid. I burst out laughing, which interrupted the class. The teacher looks to me in questioning confusion and the students stare in silence. I casually walked over to her and said loudly enough for the classroom to hear, "Let's not look at memes and Facebook jokes at school, guys." Her flush red face contorted with fear suddenly relaxed, her trembling hands stilled. I laughed again and went and debugged the wireless access point issue I was called down for. No point getting her expelled over hormonal changes and curiosity. Story 24. Not a student in particular, but a whole bunch of them. I was a substitute teacher for a few years on my university breaks, but last January was the worst middle school day I've ever had. 8th grade science class. I asked the kids to open their textbooks and work on the assignment. A girl shyly raises her hand and says, "Miss, there's something inappropriate in my book." Of course, some kid drew a. I calmly tell her to erase it and move on. 3 more kids say the same thing. I say, "If you have something inappropriate in your book, please just erase it." Every kid starts whining about how there's dicks in their books. Since they won't shut up about it, I take the offending books and replace them with different books from the back of the room. Every single book had a huge drawn in it, all 90-something of them, crudely drawn dicks, artistic dicks, Squidward, SpongeBob, you name it, it was there. The kids rioted. I almost quit. Edit. I can't believe I got my first gold for this stupid. Thanks y'all. Story 25. Not a teacher, but when I was in school those track pants with snaps down the side were popular. The boys would try to the pants off each other during class changes, and they all wore basketball shorts underneath. One day some guy thought it would be funny to rip off a girl's track pants, however she didn't have shorts on. Bright purple undies on show and the look of terror on that boy's face was hilarious. She just ran off and a friend followed with her pants. Story 26. I organized an activity that was sort of like Never Have I Ever, but positive and meant to build empathy. Basically, a student would say, "You're in my boat if," and whatever they say that is the same as you have to stand up and find another chair. Great activity. One of the girls, who I often found puzzling because she just did and said things that were nonsensical, started her period and got blood all over multiple chairs. Some kids start looking at the seats and have no idea what's going on. The girls in the class figure it out, but don't say anything, they just avoid said tainted chairs. The boys, however, are as dumb as a box of rocks and are touching it and sitting in the seats. I'm sitting there horrified, since 1, that's disgusting, 2, I didn't initially know who was pulling a carry, and 3, how the do I nonchalantly stop the activity to get this biohazard cleaned up and no one really notices, after short observation of the students, I noticed that the one girl was the unfortunate cause of all this. I told her that she was to do a favor for me, and I stepped outside. I asked her if she knew that she started her period, and she said yes. I sent her to the office and then went back in the room for damage control. I honestly don't know how I concocted a magical excuse, but I told all the kids that we were invited to go to the library for silent reading time but had to go now because all the good squishy seats would be taken if they didn't hustle. They believed me, and I sent them down there. A few girls stayed behind that figured out what happened, and I told them I knew and sent them as well. I finally get on the phone and inform the unfortunate janitor about the bloodbath in my room. Story 27. Oh God, so many of these at a shitshow of a Catholic school 7th grade sweetest most innocent girl asked me what a G-spot is. I'm a guy, I said I didn't know. That's partially true. Walked in on a bunch of kids vaping in the bathroom while talking about how shitty of a teacher their English teacher was. I had fun with that one. One of the students had to give a presentation on an interest of theirs part of an essay, and she went on a long tangent about fencing, and all the I think more well-liked children laughed at her. She left the room in tears, and I felt so bad I just wanted to kill those kids. Little Korean kid stole vodka from his parents to seem cool and brought it into school in a water bottle. The kids drank it and ratted on him immediately. Sorry, Kenny. And perhaps the best was when this emotionally disturbed kid, this was actually when I taught 5th, got pissed about something quite trivial and threw his desk in a show of retard strength, then ran out of the school and was asked to leave the following day. Story 28. One of my mother's students took a whole pizza in the box out of her office and just started eating. When told to stop and put it back, he licked the rest of the pizza and asked if he could have it. She said no and told him to throw it away. He started arguing that it was better in his stomach than in the trash. My mom was furious. Story 29. In 6th grade science class, our teacher asked if anyone knew what the arms of an octopus were called, and this kid immediately raised his hand and blurted out testicles. Everyone was laughing, including the teacher, who also snorted. His face was so red. Story 30. My friend and I got busted on day 1 of 8th grade social studies passing a crude drawing of a classmate if ours getting spit roasted by 2 large-dicked men wearing party hats. I didn't think the teacher looked at it until I got summoned to the office during next period. The principal unfolded the drawing and says to us, "Can you boys explain to me what this is?" I knew I was. My friend reaches over the desk and grabs it, holds it close to his face like he's scrutinizing it, and says to the principal, "It looks like a picture of classmate having with 2 large men, and I think they're wearing party hats." I lost it. My friend got expelled midway through that year for threatening to kill the principal during math class. Story 31. Not a teacher, but I interned with one recently, apart from the kid who insisted on being called Frisk Undertale, I guess, but the craze had died down, so it was just weird. There was one girl who wore a cat ear headband, kinda cute, since they were the metal silhouette type that kids wear, but she paired it with a cat tail.
A big, black and white, furry cat tail.
Story 32. The student spent an entire semester speaking in a Russian accent for an experiment. No one questioned him. First day back from winter break, he is back to talking normal. We were all incredibly confused, and his parents ended up going to the superintendent about our school allowing bullying. Story 33. Kids pick their nose and usually eat what they pick while I'm teaching. I think they forget that I can see them while I'm at the front of the class talking. Story 34. Not a teacher, but when I was in middle school I did all sorts of cringy. Asked my crush if I could use her shoulder as a pillow, tried running with my arms in front of me in a cone more aerodynamic, in gym, and more. Story 35. Not a teacher, but once, a kid took his shirt off, stood on a desk, and danced, and when the teacher tried to kick him out, he took his pants off and asked the teacher if she wanted the D. Story 36. Not me, but a teacher of mine, also not middle school but high school. This teacher had been teaching for 30 years. She was telling us that if we were ever bored we should read through the school's rulebook, because there were some wild rules listed that had to be written because kids do some wildly moronic things. She then proceeded to tell us about the one she had a hand in making. She left her classroom and came back to a kid taking a huge dump on his desk because he got upset. Apparently back then they couldn't do anything but detention because it wasn't written down as a school rule, and the kid's parents fought to keep the kid in because it was a pretty good school. The rule that resulted from this ordeal, as I remember it, read students are not allowed to urinate or on any property of the school. This includes, but is not limited to, desks. Just desks was listed. Story 37. First off, I'm not a teacher, however I had an interesting classmate in middle school. In the middle of English class during a test the teacher gave out the loudest scream I have ever heard. Everyone looks over to see this kid with his in his hand. He had started jerking off in the back of the class, and the first person to see was this poor old teacher. Story 38. I had a classmate who had to give a presentation using PowerPoint. So there is a computer hooked up to a projector that is pointed at a screen that fills the wall. This guy sticks his USB with his presentation in the computer, and it automatically loads the images he had on it in a gallery. He had a full folder of pictures of girls from his class he had downloaded from Facebook. That was kinda awkward. Story 39. I had a couple of Markiplier fangirls a couple years ago that just gave me the heebie-jeebies. Group of about 20 kids that run up and down the hall shouting about memes. One of which, when asked what he did over the weekend, started with, "So, do you know the insert obscure meme?" While making Earth Day posters one kid tried to disguise pot leaves as palm trees. There were several I love trees on it. Earth Day was on 422, so he also wrote the first two with a swirl at the end so that it looked like head written 420, but it just looked like 4202. I probably should keep a list, but they happen so often I don't think I'd ever be able to keep up with it. Story 40. We had this one kid in our 8th grade class stick his entire hand in a cake that was being passed around for a party, grab a chunk and started eating it like a Neanderthal. It was chocolate and his face was covered. When he finished his chunk of cake with everyone looking in disgust, he then proceeded to lick every finger. It was torture watching. He also ended up being the kid that threatened to blow up the school at the end of the year. Story 41. I taught middle school in an East Asian country. For some reason, boys have a lot of built-up energy. Frequently saw groups of boys dry each other up to 4 deep. A lot of times they would just be chilling near the soccer field after lunch, sitting on each other's laps doing some subtle mini thrusts. I asked them what they were doing once, and they all got super defensive. Story 42. Not a teacher, but when I was in grade 9, my grades weren't the best. On the day of the big graduation ceremony, they came and told me I didn't have enough credits to graduate. But they're passing me anyway because I just barely squeaked by. I thought, great, I made it, so I went along with my classmates to the ceremony. So there we were, a group of about 300 kids in rows and rows of chairs on one side of the gym, and all the parents and families of the kids on the other side. They started calling up the kids one by one to receive their certificates. And once they were called up, they all stood on these bleachers at the back of the stage for a big photo at the end of the ceremony. So the rows and rows of chairs we were in slowly emptied out as the names were called, one by one. Then when they got to my row, my name wasn't called. The guys on each side of me got called, but not me. Finally, the very last kid was called up, and there I was still sitting there, all alone in the middle of this vast layout of empty chairs in the gym. People were staring, whispering, pointing. Guess that kid didn't graduate. Must be a real dummy. I never felt lower in all my life. I wanted to run out of there, but I was too scared to draw even more attention to myself, so I just sat there. I still cringe to this day when I think about it. On the bright side, I was able to walk out of that hellacious school, with its abusive teachers and bullying students, for the very last time. Story 43. Not a teacher. Sorry to be that person. In middle school, my friends and I were not in the popular crowd, but one of my friends had a huge crush on the most popular boy in school, who was also a major. So one day, she brought him a bouquet of flowers and a heart-shaped box of chocolates. She brought the gift to him before school where he and his douchey friends hung out and asked him to be her boyfriend. I happened to be nearby and witnessed the whole thing. They laughed and laughed at her until she ran away crying. Despite riding the same bus as her, I never saw her again that school year. I saw her that summer since she lived nearby, and she told me she transferred schools because of the incident. Poor girl was brave enough to give it a shot, just to be literally laughed out of the school. Story 44. Not a teacher, but I had a classmate on a field trip rub mud all over his clothes and body so he could go home. Turns out his mom's car broke down and she couldn't pick him up. He had to wear his muddy clothes for the rest of the trip. Story 45. My husband teaches English at a middle school. He brought some creative writing assignments home to grade, and since I'm an assistant teacher for much younger humans kindergarten, he drafted me into helping him sort through the mess and grade them. We've made good progress through the stack when I pick up a paper that had a kiss mark near the name in lipstick. Okay, that's odd, but I'm used to working with kids who are only just figuring out bathroom habits. A little lipstick on a report is hardly weird in my book. Plus middle school. Then I see the name. Hun, who is our husband without missing a beat? R is this goth kid who looks like a rainbow threw up on him after having marathon with a unicorn. I look back at the kiss mark, glitter lipstick. Nice shade choice if the kid is going for goth pale. I read his creative writing assignment. I get up halfway through to go pour myself more wine. It's extremely well-written gay featuring my husband and another teacher at the school. The kid is going places. I don't know what those places are, but he's going places. Story 46. Not a teacher but was a student. One of my classmates had a history presentation. He screamed at the top of his lungs. Largianess. Nobody had any clue what that meant. Everyone was staring at him while he was just smiling, scanning the room, and slowly started to realize no one knew what he said. His smile quickly went away, and he began his presentation. Story 47. I have had a 12-year-old student, with a dirty face and hands, lick his hands to figure out if the brown was chocolate pudding. It wasn't, to be fair. He regularly ate a pudding cup without a spoon as kids tend to do. I did not eat lunch that day. Story 48. The cringiest thing I heard in middle school actually came from a parent. My friend's mom was giving me a ride home with my friend and started preaching about God and whatnot. Friend's mom: when you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you feel it in your heart. Friend: mom: what about the kid who got hit by a car while walking in the crosswalk last week and died? Friend's mom: well, that's what happens when you don't accept Jesus into your heart. Edit double typed a word. Story 49. I was a sub for middle schoolers in Florida, and they beat and stole from another kid in my face and told me to off. Kids are animals. People are animals, to be fair. Story 50. Got another one. A girl masturbated in class using the edge of the seat. Not discreet either, as many of her peers had a WTF look on their faces. This girl was sweating hard. Seriously, most uncomfortable office meeting and parent conference. Story 51. This may not be what you mean by cringiest, but it made me cringe. I'm a middle school teacher, and a boy in my homeroom, we'll call him Zeke, was way behind in social development. As a favor, I gave him tips about getting along with people. I told him one good idea was to say nice things about them. So the next period, he picked up a little statue that a girl in our homeroom had made in art, and he said that's a really nice figure. She shrieked at him, "Zeke, put that down, you'll break it." Then she grabbed it out of his hand, glared at him, and stomped off. He slunk away and probably never talked to anyone again. Story 52. Not a teacher. There was this girl who liked the popular athletic girl. She liked her a little too much. She made a slideshow and presented to the whole class. Felt kinda bad. Story 53. Valentine's Day, and a boy brings a girl a dozen roses. They were both in my homeroom, so I watched this all go down right in front of me. I had literally never seen these two have a conversation before either. Girl didn't know what to do with roses at 7 a.m., so she threw the roses in the trash can literally 20 seconds after it happened and went on her merry way. The boy never found out. Story 54. Not a teacher. But in 7th grade biology we dissected rats, and the teacher warned that they might be juicy from preservatives, so I grabbed my dead rat, turned it over in the air and shouted, "You gotta squeeze the puddin' out of it." My lab mate fainted as brown juices poured onto the table. I am now an adult biologist who does not do quite the same stuff. Story 55. Walked in bathroom because there was a commotion while my students were in there. This boy has his pants around his ankles, pointing at his junk with both hands, asking all passers-by, "Who wants a touch?" I said, "Student's name, pull your pants up," while shaking my head, and I walked out. He came out after with a bright red face, saying, "Mr. Fingerlinger-longer, I swear I'm not gay, no need for a consequence," as he was embarrassed enough. Story 56. Okay, so I made a throwaway for this. I'm not a teacher but the cringe student, so I was in my 7th grade science class and my teacher Mr. O was preparing a lab experiment for us to observe. The entire process took a bit of time, so while grabbing all the materials and experimenting, he asks the class to tell a joke. I'm sitting beside my best friend, and he whispers a joke into my ear, and I laughed out loud. Mr. O hears this and asks, "You me bad, do you have a joke you want to share?" Not thinking twice, I respond, "Want to listen to a joke, Mr. O?" "Yes," I respond. Women's rights. The classroom goes silent, and my friend who initially told me the joke laughs the out loud. Mr. O responds after a few moments of more silence, "Want to hear a joke? You me bad getting a girlfriend." I still lose sleep over how embarrassed I was by this and that I would ever make a statement like that. Story 57. One time in middle school, I came to school with my face painted like a lizard with green eyeshadow. If you see this from one of my teachers in the comments, please let me know so I can kill myself. Story 58. I had a student who would sit in the back of the classroom and pretend to masturbate while staring at me. I really did not want to have to get the principal involved for what I understood as extremely poor decision making in an attempt to impress his classmates, but 2 instances was enough. I had to watch him tell his mother what he had done in horror. Story 59. Never became a teacher but did volunteer time at a middle school working on my education degree. Knew a student with different t-shirts with different days of the week labeled on them. That kid would never wear the right shirt on the right day. On Tuesday he might have a Thursday shirt on, Wednesday he'd wear Monday, and so on. When I asked him why, he told me it was no fun to wear them on the right days. Story 60. Kid in a fedora offering high fives in the hallway, but then dabbing just before the other person's hand made contact. It was supposed to be a prank for a vlog. Story 61. Not a teacher, but in middle school, these kids were playing truth or dare with this kid. We'll call him Dylan. Someone would say dare and it'd be sometimes like, "I dare you to force Dylan to eat his homework in front of Mrs. Smith or whatever." Well, it got to Dylan and he said dare. They ducking dared this kid to ask to use the restroom, rip off pubic hairs from his, come back with them, and eat them, and he did. It was so disgusting and word spread quick, and that followed him even until now, graduated and living his own life, and he will still get called this when someone from school sees him. I saw him one day at the store and heard "Pubby, how the RYA man" at him, and I was mortified for him masturbate with a pencil. Story 62. We were doing a project involving postcards and the Silk Road, which I was hanging in the hallway. Some kid wrote the postcard out, and used it as an opportunity to include a part in the letter asking a girl classmate to the upcoming dance. He came to me and asked if I could make sure his letter was at eye level on the bulletin board outside my classroom for her to see. At that moment, every dumb thing I have ever done to impress a girl had flashed before my eyes. I could only imagine the congregation of his classmates outside my class reading this note and never letting him live it down. I wanted to spare him, but I figured my job was to educate, not shield him from how cruel the world can be for passionate people like ourselves. I ended up obliging. I managed to catch her reaction by chance while I was still putting up the bulletin board display. The look on her face when she read it was awfully WTF, and she did show a friend, but everything went better than expected for the kid. She agreed to go to the dance with him and that was the end of that. I'm sorry I don't have a better ending. Story 63. Basically, everything Paint Chips did was cringy, but I'll tell you why I referred to him as Paint Chips. One day out of the blue in my silent classroom he says out loud, "Has anyone ever eaten paint chips?" Some of the students looked at him with the usual contempt, but no one answered as was their custom. He then adds, "Because I have." It explained a lot. Edit just to clarify. Paint Chips was talking about pieces of dried paint that chip off the wall or building. He was a very odd kid, but I'm not sure if he was eating lead-based paint. Story 64. Incredibly camp 14-year-old boy did an 11-minute Lady Gaga dance routine wearing a kimono, 5 scarves and 3 pairs of sunglasses, one feathered while holding a fan. He then revealed to everyone that he's gay. Not one of the 150 middle schoolers present were in the slightest not surprised. Should add that everyone was incredibly supportive and were much more enthusiastic about his sexuality than the length of the medley. It was a very loving group of students. Story 65. Not a teacher, but when I was in middle school a group of kids would snort hand sanitizer to get high. This was also in the middle of class. Eventually our teacher caught them and said you can't get high off of hand sanitizer. Good times. Story 66. Not sure if this counts. Had a student projectile vomit in the middle of class. This is in middle school. Poor girl sat in the middle of the room. Vomit managed to get into the seats next to, in front of, and behind her own. Somehow so much shame in that little girl, but then she didn't want to go to the office. She just wiped off her mouth and wanted to stay. Story 67. I'm a male teacher. I once confiscated a note being passed between 6th grade girls. It turned out it was a list and they ranked all the boys in the grade in terms of attractiveness. I didn't really look at it, but later I showed it to my team and they pointed out that my name was 4 on the list. Story 68. I taught 5th grade recorder class as part of general music, so every kid had to play them for a quarter. It was awful. 15 to 20 kids, half of whom were budding criminals, playing out of tune on plastic recorders. I was in the middle of bitching them out yet again, when I heard what sounded like a sneeze combined with a squeak. I look over, and the dumpiest, runkiest boy in the class, the gross kid if you will, had sneezed with his recorder in his mouth, and proceeded to blow clear snot through it, and onto his fingers. He sat there for like 15 seconds dumbfounded, with that orange clear plastic recorder hanging out of his mouth. Finally I told him to just put it on the table. A few minutes later, I accidentally knocked it on the floor, and it broke, justifying my throwing it away after class. I bought a new one at the 99cent store, because I was not giving that thing to anyone else.